Nice. Okay, hello everybody. Those who are in different parts of the world, we are here today once again in one more episode of Capsulas. And for of those who are out there and don't necessarily know, Capsulas is sort of like a new way of sharing some of the knowledge that we've been doing, having a chat with different scholars, both senior scholars, emerging scholars, about what's going on out there in terms of research, in terms of theory, in terms of pedagogical approaches to do things out there, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like capsulas, that's what exactly means, like providing a little bit of nurturing knowledges to folks out there in providing some information of what's happening right now in terms of research and why not. So here we are, and today I have the pleasure of inviting Wales Wong, who we have been working for a while in different capacities. So today we have the pleasure to talk about our work and our research, duoethnography work, but also exactly how we did it and what research methodology we used. So, Wales, tell us a little bit about yourself so our audience knows who you are.
Sure. I am currently a PhD candidate at Boise, University of Toronto, the last stages of the PhD program. So busy writing away as always. My focus has been for the past few years on translanguaging, teacher education, how best to support a multilingual / plurilingual classroom. And in particular with the research that we did here, really looking at language education from the social justice perspective, how we can support our students in addressing anti-Black racism in an ESL classroom. So for me, as a visible minority, I was born in the States, in the US. Then I lived for a period of time in Hong Kong, and eventually moved over to Canada to start to come to do my undergrad. And since then I've been here. And so my experiences has brought me to many different locations and many different encounters of how people see me, how people interact with me. And those are experiences that I feel like are very important and necessary to bring into my classrooms. And so in this research that we did as a duoethnography, I think that one of the common things that between Yusid and I have is just that, we have a very rich experience when it comes to not just being a student, but to also being educators, and to also what we feel are important things that we want our students to be able to gain when it comes to learning the language. And for me, it's about the students learning the language to be able to support themselves and to be able to be a person that can speak up and speak out about a lot of these injustices that are happening, not just where they're currently living at, but in places that they've already lived at, places that they've left because of these injustices, and the potential for what will happen in their futures. And so that's a little bit about me and a little bit of how I'm connected to this research.
Yes, thank you so much for letting us know a little bit about you, because sometimes we forget that there is an audience out there that they don't know who we are, and then or they perhaps come to this event later and watch this video once it's been recorded, so they want to know who the person is and who we are. And speaking about who we are, again, everybody, my name is Yosid Ortega, and I am a cisgender straight guy coming from Colombia in Latin America, lived in the United States for a number of years, then in Canada for another number of years, and became Canadian citizen. And then now I live here in the UK, more specifically in Belfast in Northern Ireland. And then throughout all of these international experience and trajectory as an educator and as a researcher, as you can imagine, I have experience the discrimination as a Latinx brown person. And one day when during the pandemic, when Wales and I um, were having different discussions about education and research and things like that, we sort of started working along the lines of what can be done about addressing these issues of discrimination and racism, um, especially in the classroom, right? And then Wales, as a teacher and educator, teaching immigrant students, adult students, ESL, etc. So we started chatting a little bit about how can this be done? How can we engage in these conversations? So we envisioned different sessions of chats to talk about it and reflect about it. How can we create those spaces for Wales students, but also for me as a researcher engaging in new ways of approaching research and how I can support her role as an educator as well, and what I can learn as well, and support her through this cause. So that was my role in this research that we did a couple of years back as an duoethnography approach to research. And my role was as a critical friend, a person who was always there with you, talking about the issues, right? So now Wales is going to help us to understand why is this methodology, duoethnography, so important.
So our intention was to collaborate. And so I think that Isita brought this up first, that a duoethnography would be most appropriate for how we could engage in our conversations and our experiences through praxis. It was about being able to juxtapose the experiences that we've had with the common goal of wanting to understand how we can support our students. And another thing that came up for us was the importance of reflection in doing this work. And generally, when we think about reflection, as a teacher, for me, at least I should say, it's always been very solitary, very independent, very much about let's write down how we feel in our journals, or let's write down notes and then we can talk about and compare notes later on. But that sometimes with that kind of reflective thinking, it could be too solitary. And I find that even for me in my experiences in the past, that, when I first became a teacher, we were taught that it's important to always reflect on our practices, keeping a journal and so on. But, with the day-to-day of things, it can easily just be something like, oh, now I need to sit down and write for an hour. It just doesn't happen. However, with this kind of duoethnography, the way that it was set up, Yassine and I met once every 2 weeks to kind of touch base on what was happening. And in those conversations which we have called now coffee chats, we were able to discuss a lot more than just that. And I almost feel like we were able to discuss a lot more because there was a dialogue between him and I. I work best in dialoguing. I work best in having somebody be my soundboard. And while I do see the value of writing too as reflective practice, this added on an additional layer to the work. And as duoethnography has the word duo in it, is about two people working together, collaborating, trying to understand and analyze a particular phenomenon. And this kind of collaboration where we got to communicate was also, for me, I think it created a new type of meta-narrative for us to kind of explore. Why are we saying the things that we're saying? How are we saying these things? And in particular, when we recorded these coffee chats and was able to go back and analyze them, that's kind of how I think that for both of us, we saw a new way of really understanding ourselves, in the present, as seeing how we were in the past. So that's just a little bit of why this duoethnography is so important. And also to remind the audience that when this study took place, it was during the pandemic. And so more so that if we were going to have a collaboration that would encourage us to be able to interact, to me, it made for more robust and rich analysis of what we collected as data.
Absolutely. I think you described pretty well what these specific ethnographic work happened. But one of the key parts of the work that we did in terms of ethnography is, you mentioned, yes, we did it during the pandemic. Yes, we did it online. And yes, we did coffee chats, which were this dual exchange of knowledge and support and engaging with knowledge, answering questions, supporting each other. So we call this coffee chats. And through that process, we started thinking that we were recording these video chats, right? We purposely recorded because we wanted to reflect on them. And you mentioned, Wales, that the idea of this exercise being a reflection on the work that we do and how we do it, and the possibilities of how can we support better students facing and understanding or trying to engage in along the lines of anti-Black racism at that time. So it got us thinking, how can we analyze this? And then at some point, I shared with Wales the idea, during the pandemic, there were a lot of TikToks and a lot of online work out there. And I remember one of the many, either TikTok or YouTube, a lot of videos about reactions. People would sit down and react about a video. Like, for example, hip hoppers reacting metal music kind of thing, and so on and so forth, or children reacting how cats behave, things like that. So it got me thinking, maybe what we can do is react and reflect on the videos that we recorded, right? So in other words, replay those videos that we recorded having these coffee chats, and then reflect and react on those videos, what we said, how we said it, when we said it, what were the topics around those topics. And then we discovered that there is an actual analysis technique, so to speak, that is called video stimulated recall. That has been done for a while. It's nothing necessarily new. But then we started discussing, oh, that sounds very interesting. How are we going to do this? So we started digging a little bit about how this is done. And technically, video stimulated recall is about interviewing people, asking questions, other people, as a research technique in which the subjects, in this case us, view a video sequence of our behaviors, and we are all invited to reflect on the decision-making processes during that video event. So in other words, the researcher asked the participant to watch video of what the participant did, and then ask questions about, why did you do this? Why did you do that? Why did you do this instead of doing this? And then the participant gets to analyze that and reflect on that. So we did this idea in a more like a sort of a dialogic way, in which we were recording ourselves, watching our video reactions and reflecting. So in other words, this was about inviting ourselves as participants to recalling the recurrent thinking during that specific event, as we were prompted by different video sequences, or sometimes different types of visual recalls, like, oh, that reminded me of this, that reminded me of other things. So, oh, I didn't realize that I was looking at this, or that I was saying this other thing. So that's why this particular technique, it's about recalling, right? Like going back in time to that moment in which we were sort of discussing those moments that we recorded. I don't know if you want to say something around about that, Wales.
I know you're going to elaborate on this, but I think one of the things about recalling something, particularly for me, it's quite difficult to recall certain things because of the kind of modality that's being used. So again, I go back to the traditional reflective practice of writing. For me to read something that I've written before, it does bring back the memory. but something of having a video to be able to kind of see the imagery, to see the background, like to see our faces and to see the body language that was happening at that time, and also to be able to hear our voices, the tone, the emotions, that it just made for a very fulsome way of recalling what was happening because it was there. So I will just add that, and I do know that you're going to probably talk a little bit more about that too.
Yeah, I think one of the main reasons why we decided to approach this analysis in a different way. I mean, there are several reasons, but one of the most important ones, were because we wanted to explore different ways of doing things, like sort of pushing the boundaries of what it means to do an analysis. Typically in qualitative research, we do content analysis, theme analysis, text analysis, conversation analysis, discourse analysis, all of those sorts of things. But I think we wanted, since we were recording video, well, there is a video, and then we were thinking about recalling or trying to understand what those videos meant. Well, this modality would make sense for that, because we wanted to explore that method of analysis by recording the video and analyzing them, and it will help us to explore those visual and auditory parts that we sometimes didn't realize, that sometimes when you have a text or an image, you don't necessarily see the nuances of that analysis, right? And I believe we recorded from 1 to 8 basic videos initially. In a sense, we did a little bit of a content analysis of the video. So individually, we recorded 1 video each of the videos that we were recording. And then after that, we did a couple more videos to reflect on those videos, right? Is it how it was? Remind me.
Yeah, I mean, we had actually a total of 10 videos, I believe. It was 10 videos, and it was like the last 2 videos that we decided to think about using this approach to analysis. So the video recall was what we did with the last 2 videos, and which made a lot of sense to me too, because I think we were coming to the tail end of our research. Things were coming full circle. There was a lot more to think about as we kind of put closure on, what was happening with my classes. My class was already finishing up with their assignments and so on. The other thing I also wanted to add to, when you talked about, the audio visual component to analyzing the data, is not just the nuances, but it also became very multidimensional in the way we can perceive or approach or just kind of see the data. And for me, it almost gave us like all these different ways to enter the data too. When I think about the notes we were making, like, okay, what are we going to talk about here? Well, so many things we can talk about. We can talk about the emotional element, affect, of like, how we were kind of processing everything as we were having these discussions. We can talk about, obviously the relationships that were being built, not just the relationships I had with my students, but the connection that we have to each other in this duoethnography too, to really understand like how to, like, first of all, to just also talk about, like, you and I have known each other for 8 years now. And we knew each other both when we both entered the program, when I was a master's student, when you were a PhD student. And so since then, our journeys have grown, and hence our collaborative work has also grown too. And seeing that unfold in our coffee chats was also very valuable to me, because that also contributes to why this duoethnography was so important and so fitting for us, because of the established relationship that we already had as colleagues, as friends, and in this particular study as researchers.
Right. No, you absolutely. I think one of the things, as you were speaking, we did individual videos analyzing the data. then we get together to analyze the videos that we analyze, and then we did another meta-analysis in which we analyze the video that we analyzed. So it was so interesting because it was like one of those movies that you were mentioning. What was the movie again?
Inception, like a dream
Inception.
within a dream. Within a
Exactly.
dream.
So I felt a
Yeah.
moment in which you see this infinite mirror of us looking at
Yeah.
each other, how we reflect on each other, and it became like a mirror of
Mhm.
ourselves, and it's became like we are accountable of ourselves, right?
Mhm.
First, and today in this live stream, we're being accountable to the world because we are doing a beyond the meta-analysis, because now we are analyzing how we analyze the videos that we analyze. So it's like beyond the supra meta analysis video recall. So if we want to call it that way, something like that. So I wonder if you have a video to show us of how this work.
Yeah, sure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just show like about a minute worth of a clip from one of our second to last videos that we shot, that we recorded, of us engaging in the conversation of like what's happening in my class. I wanted to preface first, so just so you have a little bit of background. The focus of that 1 minute clip that we both got out of it was, just kind of understanding the humanity of being a teacher, and also understanding how important it is to have this kind of collaborative work between teachers and researchers, making praxis be possible, and what are the opportunities in that, or I should say, like, what are the possibilities that it fosters by doing so. And so what had happened was, because we were wrapping up the course, I think there was probably only 1 or 2 more weeks left. And unfortunately, that past week, a colleague had passed away. And so I was kind of grappling with that emotionally. And at the same time, that past weekend, the storming of Capitol Hill had happened too, which was also very relevant to the content and the conversations that we were having about being able to talk about social justice in the classroom. And I'll show the video so that you can see. And this is right at the beginning of what our coffee chats usually are, like an hour. And it's right at the beginning where we're having a check-in with each other. So let me just get here first. Share the screen. All right. To let you know where I'm at, like, I know there's a little bit of like personal / work related stuff in there, but I think that's also a part of like being a teacher, right? Like, you're not just planning a curriculum, you're also living, you're living day to day, like working with colleagues. And so that's the update for right now, just in a
You
gist.
are a human being, and that's what it is, right? That's what I see. Like you just mentioned it, that it's being a teacher, is being a person, and things matter, things affect us, I believe,
Yeah,
right? And then
absolutely.
it's not like we are single individuals trying to do some work, but we are connected to others. You are connected to your colleagues, to staff, and whatever happens to them sort of in somehow generates an impact on yourself on a personal level that also affects um, your work.
Yeah. So that's the clip. Well, I imagine we were going to talk a little bit more about it, but to also just again focus more a little bit about the methodology that we were doing here. We also had so what we were doing is we would rewatch this recording of our coffee chat, and then as we were doing it, we would also do the video recall analysis. And you see, it had created a template of how we can kind of like think about what conversations were had, what was the topics, and so on. And so I'll show also our notes, and we did this individually while we were watching the video together. Let's see here, share. So the first set of notes were my notes. And so you can see here, it's like the date, what were the guidelines for doing that, watching the video with your partner, take notes on reflection, comments, and connections, pause when necessary if we wanted to have anything that we wanted to talk about or even think about more, and summarize any connecting themes or ideas. And these were my notes. And a lot of this I kind of saw as like, what was the big themes that came from this whole recording? So for me, it was humanity, connection, and affect and education, and also the logistics of teaching and conducting research at the same time. So very much a point form, just really just writing down as much as I could so that we can talk about it later. And then for Yasid, as you can see here, his notes, for me, like when I read it, like, because we obviously got a chance to take a look at each other's notes too during the analysis of these of our notes. And it's very much like just this like kind of narrative that was happening during the video and the flow of it. And maybe you can speak a little bit more to like how your process was when you were taking notes here.
Yeah. I'm glad that we're doing this because, like I said, this is the supra meta analysis of the video within the video by doing this live stream. And absolutely, it reminded me right now that I have the template and I have the question. And as I was watching the video, recall, so I would take notes on this template based on the emotions, based on the feelings, based on the perspectives that were happening at this particular moment. And as you can see, as you're scrolling right now, Wales, most of the things were about, it looks like our conversations, we were trying to figure it out, how to engage students along the lines of social justice and anti-Black racism in the English language teaching. However, we realize that we cannot necessarily separate the pedagogical part, the professional part, from the personal part. And in this particular video, we talk a lot about caring and loving each other and helping each other and supporting each other in terms of who we are as professionals, right? But also how we go about this research, but also how can the research support the pedagogical approach or your initiatives in the classroom, how you're going to create a safe classroom environment for your students that are in line with us as human beings. So in a sense, all of these themes about humanizing pedagogical approaches, humanizing research, it was coming in. And as I reflect right now in this supra meta analysis right now, it looks like that is the way to go, in my opinion, in terms of research. How can we humanize more research by having these type of conversations that we are having right now, but also having connections with those who are in the chat box today, right? That there are folks out there in the chat box of these live streams that you could potentially engage with them and asking them questions, or they can ask us questions as well. So in a sense, the research doesn't become this silo thing that there is this dude, with a magnifying glass trying to do research on its own, but it's more like a collective thing, right? Like it is me analyzing the video right now, but like I said, those who are in the live stream can potentially ask questions. And then it becomes again this public accountability of love and care.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the things that you noted here too that came out of it and that we were talking about is that for me, the importance of not just the work that we were doing in what was happening in the classroom, but the way we were doing it with this collaborative effort was that it was one therapeutic way for me to come to terms with a lot of things that I was grappling with as a teacher, as an educator, as a student at the time, as a researcher, all these different roles that I had taken on and that I was trying to figure out what I was becoming. Like this is a part of the process of PhD work, is you're not only growing as a researcher, but you're also growing as a human too, as you had said, the humanizing part of it. And a lot of people that I've spoken to, and obviously my own experience too as a PhD student and shifting over to or transitioning into a candidate, is the kind of growth and changes that you go through. And so where does that conversation come in? And so I was able to have that conversation while we were engaging in this work. And so these videos were not just solely focused on the work that was happening inside my classroom. It extended beyond that. And it was important that it extended beyond that, because I might think at times like, oh, I think I'm digressing to see it. I'm starting to talk too much about, what's happening with this part of my life or what's happening with my writing as I'm trying to do all this work in the classroom. But as he had said, for a human being, all of these things matter in some way and they contribute to our teaching. And so that in one thing, like I remember that in one situation where, we had to think about our positionality in this study, there's so much to talk about, right? How can you really talk about just yourself and situate yourself in the study? But of course, we had to set parameters on that. But this study gave me the opportunity to really investigate and like really delve deeper into what exactly makes up who I am. Because the work of addressing racism in life, in the classroom, like it's so important to understand who our identities are. And I think it would be very limited for us to just say, I come into the classroom as a teacher and I just teach these values to our students. Well, these values come from somewhere. These beliefs come from somewhere. And we're constantly evolving. My stance is never going to be the same. Like what I say today is not going to be the same tomorrow. And so when we were able to also do these video recall analysis, I could go back and take a look at what I had to say at that time and think about where I am now. Would I still feel the same? Has my feeling and beliefs changed? Would my approach to how I would have handled the situation be different now compared to before? So there's just multiple dimensions and layers to this that I found very fruitful to developing my own pedagogy in the classroom.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing that how this research approach impacted you, because in a sense, for me, it was a way of experimenting, right, with research approaches, and the fact that you sort of help out with that experimentation and allow me to say, hey, yeah, let's experiment this thing. So the impact of this work for me was about that, specifically exploring other forms of doing research, because it provided me with the means to understand how to capture those rich real-time responses that may not be readily accessible through traditional recall methods, right? And by reviewing the video footage that we recorded, I was able to reflect on my own work and also on Whale's reflection on her motivations and her emotions and during specific moments during coffee chat. So it was a lot about let's explore what is possible and move beyond that, as you mentioned, beyond of what is expected, beyond of what we have been trained in the academic world of what's supposed to be done and how it's supposed to be done in terms of qualitative research. And we certainly did this type of exploration. And for me, that was the best sort of takeaway. I can explore this, and if I can explore this, there are other ways of doing it as well. And we can tell the world that there is not only one way, but plural ways of doing things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm just taking a little bit of water. It gets a little bit dry in my mouth, but I was just thinking about the methodology itself, about how does this methodology help answer different types of research questions out there? Because a lot of people are asking, but oh, that is not research. That is just you guys hanging out there on the video and doing things that and that. A lot of people might think about it, but
Yeah.
not necessarily, I would say, because during this video stimulated recall process, it was, how should we put it, very sort of analytical, but also sequential as well. And it was an actual process in which we as researchers could also use different types of techniques which have been used in the past, the think aloud protocols, like even sometimes when you read something aloud, you start reflecting more on what you're reading, something that you wrote 3-4 weeks ago, let's say on your journal, as you mentioned earlier. And sometimes we as participants are encouraged to verbalize those thoughts and ideas that we never thought about watching the video. So further provoking more insights on the different cognitive processes and different types of decision making as well, right? So video stimulated recall as a methodology can help researchers like us to answer different research questions by providing those valuable insights or robustness into the participants' thoughts, experiences, feelings, emotions, ideas, how we interpret data, how we relate that to the video content, etc. And by doing that and engaging in these post-video discussion, interview, conversations, dialogues, etc., we somehow gained a deeper understanding of our subjective experiences, emotions, and cognitive processes. And certainly, I learned more about you, both as a teacher, as a researcher, as a human being, and we got to know each other better, right? And this information helped us answer those questions that we pose down the road for our duoethnographic approach, about how we interpret those reactions and how we engage with the research questions. And in our particular cases, how can we go about social justice within the ESL class, right? And by engaging both of us in these conversations and recalling the information, we somehow were able to answer those questions about anti-Black racism in the classroom, right? So in a sense, those conversations and going about reflecting on those things help us to answer the questions more vividly, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. I heard like earlier when you were talking about, I mean, it sounds like there's a question about the validity and reliability of this methodology. And I see in it that there's just so many things that we can check in with by doing a meta video analysis recall, that it's not just one person who's trying to go back to see, like, does this piece of data check in with this piece of data? It's also you and I having a conversation. Was there something that we missed? Was there something that you were not clear of that I didn't communicate, or vice versa? And I think that those opportunities themselves also really helped us to just kind of like create a more clearer picture of what was happening in my class, what was happening for me, and that when we did a video recall and then we can write down our notes and then come together to kind of see like, hey, is what you were talking about the same as what I was thinking about? And again, have another conversation about it. That to me made it so that the data became even more clear, just simply because it was so nuanced too at the same time. And then the other part to it, you had mentioned like very early on when we first started this little thing that we're doing here.
Coffee chats.
The coffee chats, yeah. Is the reacting, right? The reacting part, right? From the TikTok videos. And when I was thinking more about it, well, what's the purpose? What do I gain out of this? What does research have to gain out of this? And it's this process of watching these videos, reacting to it, then reflecting on it, whether it's independent or with the other person that you're doing a duoethnography with, and then the next steps in responding. And when I think about response, I think about how am I going to respond in the future in my teaching now that I have been able to see some of the things that we've talked about. Now that I've thought about some of the things I was grappling with, what are my next steps now? Because I think what can happen is when it comes to teaching and we just kind of go about every day and doing our work, and we have just really just this, whether we don't have time to reflect or our reflection just can only go so far because we're so siloed in our work sometimes, that the response that we give becomes very automatic. And to me, a response that's automatic is really a reaction rather than a response, rather than stopping to have thought about what you would want to do next and how you would implement next steps. And for something as like teaching about social justice and teaching us students about how to confront racism, it is imperative. It's absolutely so important for us to think about how we would respond rather than how we would react to the things that are happening around us, so that we can actually elicit the kind of change that we think will be beneficial, especially for the students that are visible minorities. These are like, for my students, that they're going to encounter racism all the time and that they always have encountered racism. These are important skills for not just them, but also for the teachers. You know, if the teacher is going to impart these skills, the teacher also needs to be practicing it, right? And so for me, that's what's been so valuable about the study that we've done.
Right, absolutely. And I think you got me thinking about, in general terms, how our research, it's important despite, many challenges and difficulties that we face, especially with the idea of, as you mentioned, validity and reliability. And I believe that we did a very systematic approach about going about the research that we did, because we purposely did 8 videos, then we again recorded those videos, and then we did the video recalls individually, and then we used our little template systematically, and then we did, both of us, we did a meta recall of that, and then now we're doing a live stream recalling those moments as well. So there is some kind of like a public systematic accountability to the academic world, but also to the general people, that we are doing this because we care about those who are over there. So I wonder, how does this work that we did affect you on a personal level, or what impact did you have in you?
I think it became something that I didn't think so much about, was how important it was at the time, and still is. But at that time of going through a pandemic, and just, I think all of us were struggling with that we were just so, it was a solitary time for a lot of us, let's put it that way. And I remember there was just like that opportunity for us to have met in person for an actual first coffee chat, where this study kind of came about. And then again, it's like, we got to just go back with, like, classrooms were closed off, and we had to go back to online teaching. And just being able to have a conversation with a person with the intent of working on something really provided for me this way of remembering that human connection is so important. Because as a PhD student, when I was, kind of doing the work on my own dissertation, and still am right now, it's hard to find progress when you don't have a sounding board. And one of the important parts to your role is being a critical friend, right? The criticality, but also the friend part, the friendship part. And also later on, we kind of did a little bit more working. It said there's also what in the, like, some studies have now termed like a dualship too, right? A cross between a duoethnography and a friendship there too. And I think that that's really important, because one of like the small little things that I thought about when rewatching those videos is, for me, in the background, like that's my room, that's our conversation. I was like able to have a comfortable conversation with you because I was in the safety of my own home. I felt comfortable there. I didn't feel like I'm doing what I am right now with our background, right? Like, because I clearly am still in my room, but there is this level of privacy that I want to be able to keep for myself in presenting to the public. But that's quite different when you're able to converse with your friend. You're able to speak about all of these things because we're not just colleagues, we're also friends too. And so on a personal level, it was about the kind of connection that I could build with you. And then me also being able to like remember that even during a pandemic, there are still different ways that I, as a researcher, as a teacher, as a human being, can still have some kind of way to just to be. It's a very hard way to kind of just explain, but it was just a possibility there, an opportunity there of just being able to interact with other people, and that allowed for me to grow during the pandemic as a teacher.
Yeah, I do remember specifically those moments when we were talking about that in the world, we need criticality. We need to be critical of what is happening out there in terms of anti-Black racism and discrimination and colonization and all of those sorts of things. But it also requires us to be empathetic to the other, understanding of the other, right? So that's what we learned from these, and especially from you, that you sort of helped me out to understand that we can be critical, but we can also be empathetic of the other. And that's sort of like what I learned from these. And it's sort of moving me forward into the next part, which is what are the pedagogical implications of all of these? If it is not to understand that that we can be critical, we can teach our students to be critical and use critical tools, but also to be empathetic for the other, about the others, right?
Yeah.
And something that I came up with this idea of as a pedagogical implication, it's about encouraging reflective practice among our students, right? So video stimulated recall can also be used as a pedagogical tool to promote that reflective practice among the students by recording students' presentations, perhaps recording group discussions, performances, or engaging students in post-viewing reflections. Teachers can help students develop these self-assessment skills, identifying areas of improvement and enhance their own learning process, right? But also fostering professional development. So video stimulated video recalls, similar to the ones that we did today, can be used as professional development tool for teachers, teacher educators, you name it, by reviewing video footage of their teaching and engaging in collaborative discussions with peers or instructional coaches, teachers, friends, you name it. And we can receive feedback, we can receive any type of insight or an exchange practices. This particular methodology promotes and help us promote that reflective and collaborative approach to professional growth, where teachers can learn from each other and fine-tune their instructional techniques. So that's what I learned from you, from the work that you do as a teacher educator, and that other people can learn from this experience. Is there anything related to pedagogical implications that you might want to add?
Yeah, I wanted to thank you for bringing up the empathy aspect of the work that we were doing, right? I recall that in our recent conversations that this work would not be possible with a lot of people, because if it was just a researcher that I didn't really have a prior kind of connection to or whatnot, and just said like, hey, I'd like to do this study, would you be interested? It would be difficult, because establishing a kind of relationship with the other person who's going to be your critical friend, is also having to be able to feel safe and be able to feel like you can trust that person too. And when you're grappling with these kind of issues about race, there is always a fear, I find, for anybody of being judged for particular biases that they have, for thoughts and opinions that they have, that these are ingrained in us. You know, we grew up with these beliefs and these values because of the cultures that we grew up in, the countries that we grew up in, and so on. And to be able to change things that that people believe in, that that lean towards discrimination, it doesn't help to have this perspective where you're wrong and I'm right, and I'm trying to impart on you a way of learning so that you will see what you're doing is wrong. And so be able to have a relationship and a connection with between the two researchers, you and I, and also in what I was doing as a teacher, so that I can also always constantly remember that my connection to my students is the same, is that think about them first. Think about what they're going through. Think about their experiences and so on. Be empathetic before being critical. You know, criticality is about, you know, is about looking at things closer, figuring out what are the things that we need to really think about changing. But it's not about imposing on other people another person's point of view. It's not about forcing another person to make the change, because that's not really how people evolve, and that's not really how people will think about changing their beliefs and their systems and so on, right? It's about really helping people to think for themselves too. And so for me, when we had our conversations, I felt very comfortable and safe being able to share a lot of the things that I shared with you, because I didn't feel like I was going to be judged. And from there, that's when I could think more about, okay, well, yeah, maybe these are some of the things I do need to change in the way I approach my teaching, in the way I approach my relationships with people. But I do find that as a person, if I feel like I'm going to be criticized for what I'm doing, I'm much less likely going to share so much about myself. And in this kind of work, it is quite important that we are transparent about who we are. And that's not so that people can pick at us, but it's so that people can understand us. So I would say that that was one of the other things I would add on to the pedagogical implications, because that also works the same with our students.
Right. No, absolutely. And you got me thinking, like, we have talked about the educational part, but as you were talking, it got me thinking researchers also need this critical part, critical empathetic part, right? Because at least for me, one of the key moments of doing and redoing these analysis, and even the analysis that we're doing right now in this live stream, it's the idea of keep coming back to that reflective stage as a researcher. What is my role? Who I am? What is my role with my participants? How can I engage them with the videos and recording videos? And what are the things that I can pay attention to, the different things that are happening in the videos that I am creating in collaboration with my participants? And all of these continuous process would allow us to help us enrich the work, but also connect more with our participants. So in other words, we are trying to blur that divide in between the participant and the observer, the researcher and the researched.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to, like, more humanizing pedagogical approaches in the classroom, but also humanizing research approaches in which I relate to the others, another human being. I am because you are, as they say, Ubuntu, right? And then I take that with me as a researcher. I come in contact with my research participants, not as the other that I'm going to be researching with my magnifying glass and saying, oh, let me see what I can extract from you, but more as how can we help each other, support each other, and how can I contribute with the work that you also do, and then that help us build better relationships, right? I think that that's more or less what I learned from this, from the research point of view. Is there anything that you want to add related to research specifically?
I think you encapsulate a lot of what I was thinking too already. And for me, sometimes I think the role that I have, especially in this particular research study, that my roles sometimes it's hard to distinguish from each other. So when you ask me about how does it help with research, then I think, well, it also helped with my pedagogy. It also helped with me as being a human. So a lot of those things kind of layer on with each other too. So I would say that, yeah, I think you've said a lot that I also like, I agree with. I completely agree with.
Nice. Well, we are almost wrapping up today's Capsulxs. This has been great engagement. We have analyzed the analysis of the analysis, the meta-analysis, supra-analysis of how we went about analyzing the videos that we did, how we encapsulated the work that we did, and we hope those folks who are there watching today or later in the recording get inspired to do a little bit more work that resonates with others, your communities and your your participants, but also to be critical, but also be empathetic within that criticality. Do you want to have any last words to wrap up today?
I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. It's always a pleasure to be able to talk about the research that we did, and that we continue to do, because I think that's the important part, I should say, is even after, how do we mobilize what we've already learned and what we've discovered. So thank you for this opportunity.
Not a problem. Thank you so much once again coming today to our audience today. I hope you have been inspired, and then we will see you next time in our next Capsulxs. Have a good rest of the day, everybody. Bye.
Bye.